Her parents disowned her for marrying a 70-year-old man. 2 years later she returned crying.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Claire sat in the middle of the living room, the air heavy like a gloomy cloud. The young woman took a deep breath, preparing for the moment she knew would turn everything upside down. "Mom, Dad, I have something to announce," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. Martha, her mother, set her teacup down on the table, her eyes filled with anticipation. Robert, her father, frowned slightly, still clutching his newspaper. "Go ahead," Martha encouraged with a smile, unaware that this news would wipe that smile away. "I'm getting married," Claire said, looking directly at her parents. "To Mr. Frederick." The living room seemed to freeze. Robert lowered his newspaper, staring at his daughter in disbelief. Martha covered her mouth with her hand and whispered, "Frederick, the businessman. He's 70 years old, Claire." "I know how old he is, Mom," Claire replied, trying to stay calm. "But I love him. And he loves me." Robert shot up from his seat, slamming his hand on the table. "Claire! Do you even know what you're saying? He's as old as me, even older. This is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Dad! I'm not doing anything wrong. I love Frederick. He's kind, intelligent, and cares about me," Claire argued, tears welling up in her eyes. "Cares about you? Or is he just using you to show off? A young, beautiful girl like you marrying an old man? Claire, have you thought about the family's honor?" Robert shouted, his face turning red. Martha tried to intervene. "Robert, calm down. Claire, I understand you have your reasons, but don't you think this is too much of a mismatch? Frederick is wealthy, but love isn't just about money." "Mom!" Claire screamed. "I don't care about his money. I love him sincerely." Robert let out a bitter laugh, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Sincerely? A 25-year-old sincerely in love with a 70-year-old man? Claire, do you think your parents are stupid enough not to understand?" Claire stared at her father, her voice breaking. "I didn't expect you to understand. I just wanted to inform you. If you can't accept it, I'll leave." "Leave?" Robert froze, unable to believe his ears. "You dare to defy us? Claire, if you step out that door, don't ever come back." "Robert!" Martha shouted, but Claire was already on her feet, her eyes filled with determination. "I don't need your approval. This is my life," Claire said, her voice trembling but resolute. She stepped toward the door, clutching her bag tightly, holding back her tears. "Claire, don't go." Martha ran after her, but Robert held her back. "Let her go. If she wants to make her own decisions, let her bear the consequences." The door slammed shut behind Claire. She walked down the dim streets of San Francisco, feeling lost and overwhelmed with pain. Her father's harsh words echoed in her mind. She couldn't understand why her parents couldn't support her decision when she felt happy with Frederick. On her way to Frederick's home, Claire received a message from her best friend, Alice. "Claire, is what you just said true? You're marrying Frederick?" Claire hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Yes, I've decided." The reply came quickly. "Claire, are you sure? He's so much older than you. And people will talk." Claire stopped, looking up at the starry sky. "Alice, I don't care what people say. This is my love." Even so, an unnamed anxiety lingered in Claire's heart. She knew this decision would change everything, and not everyone would understand. When she arrived at Frederick's house, he was waiting for her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Claire, you're back. What did your parents say?" Claire avoided his gaze and stepped into the house. "Let's not talk about it, Frederick." Frederick placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with concern. "I know this isn't easy for you. But don't worry, we'll get through it together. Claire gave a faint smile. She wanted to believe that everything would be fine, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd lost something vital: her family. In the early days of living with Frederick, Claire thought she'd made the right choice. The grand villa in the outskirts of San Francisco seemed like a dream, with neatly trimmed hedges and a small pond that reflected the sparkling sunlight. Claire immersed herself in the luxurious surroundings, temporarily forgetting the judgmental gazes and harsh words from her family. Frederick doted on Claire. He showered her with expensive gifts, from designer dresses to lavish jewelry. "You're my queen, Claire," Frederick whispered in her ear as he clasped a diamond necklace around her neck. Claire smiled, trying to convince herself that this was true love. They frequently attended extravagant parties. The congratulations and admiring glances from guests made Claire feel like a powerful woman. Yet, mingled with those were whispers Claire couldn't ignore. "She looks more like his daughter than his wife," a woman murmured behind Claire's back. "It must be for the money. Who could genuinely love a 70-year-old man?" a man scoffed. Claire tried to pretend she didn't hear. But the words were like sharp knives stabbing at her heart. One evening, as Claire chose a red dress to wear to a party, Frederick walked into the room, his expression cold. "That dress isn't suitable for you, Claire." Claire turned to him, surprised. "Why not?" "I think it's beautiful." Frederick frowned. "I don't want you wearing such bright colors. You should choose more subdued tones. Change it now." Claire hesitated but reluctantly changed into another dress. It was the first time she felt a subtle yet oppressive control from Frederick. At first, she thought he only wanted the best for her, but such demands grew more frequent. One morning, Claire prepared to go out to meet Alice, her best friend since college. Frederick stopped her, his tone gentle but firm. "I don't think you should see Alice anymore. She's not a good influence on you right now." Claire was stunned. "Why?" "Alice has been my best friend since university." Frederick shook his head. "People like her will only hold you back. You need to associate with people of a higher status. I only want what's best for you." Claire clenched her fists, struggling to stay calm. "Frederick, I need my own life. I can't just stay cooped up in the house." Frederick smiled, but his eyes were icy. "I'm only reminding you. Don't disappoint me." Those words left Claire speechless. She felt as if she were being trapped in a gilded cage. The suffocating feeling began to close in. Claire tried to find solace with the household staff. One of them was Mrs. Ines, an elderly housekeeper who had worked for Frederick for over 20 years. She always treated Claire with respect but with a hint of unease. One day, as Claire sat alone in the living room, Mrs. Ines gently set down a cup of tea and quietly said, "Miss Claire, I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm worried about you." Claire was taken aback. "Why would you say that, Ines?" Ines glanced quickly down the hallway, then leaned closer and spoke in a hushed tone. "Mr. Frederick is not the man you think he is. He has caused many people to suffer in the past." Claire frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ines sighed deeply. "He's in serious trouble with the law. There are rumors he's being investigated for financial fraud. But he's very good at hiding everything." Claire was stunned. "That's impossible. Frederick never mentioned anything about this." Ines looked her straight in the eye. "You need to be careful. He didn't marry you just for love." Those words left Claire reeling. Ines's warning echoed in her mind, connecting with Frederick's controlling behavior and the secrets he always kept hidden. Claire felt as though the ground beneath her feet had collapsed. She tried searching for information, but everything about Frederick appeared clean, spotless. That perfection only deepened Claire's unease. She began to realize that she might just be a tool Frederick was using to polish his image. That night, Claire lay awake, unable to sleep. The ticking of the clock echoed in the vast bedroom, a painful reminder of her crushing loneliness. She missed her mother, the evenings spent watching movies with Martha, and her father Robert's funny stories. Now, all of it felt so far away. But Claire didn't dare return home. She feared her father's coldness and her mother's disappointed gaze. She had chosen this path, and now she had to bear the consequences. In the darkness, Claire whispered to herself, as if asking for clarity. Did I make a mistake? The following days passed heavily. Claire felt as if she were living in a gilded cage, where everything was luxurious but suffocatingly oppressive. Frederick continued to act kind toward her, but his control over her grew more apparent and insidious. One morning, as Claire entered Frederick's office to ask about their weekend plans, she accidentally overheard his phone conversation. Frederick hadn't noticed her presence. His voice was low and stern. No, we need to deal with this lawsuit quickly. We can't let the media catch wind of anything. Claire. Don't worry, she knows nothing. She's just a pawn. Claire's heart stopped. She stepped back, her pulse racing. Frederick was hiding something. And worse, he was using her. She rushed back to her room, trying to steady herself. Inessa's warnings replayed in her mind. Frederick wasn't the man he pretended to be. Claire began to feel afraid. That evening, Claire resolved to confront Frederick. As the two sat in the grand dining room, Claire placed her knife and fork down and looked him directly in the eye. Frederick, I overheard you talking about the lawsuit. Are you hiding something from me? Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. Frederick froze for a moment before quickly regaining his composure. He set his wine glass down on the table, his gaze sharp. Were you eavesdropping on me, Claire? I didn't mean to. But I have a right to know what's going on. You said I'm just a pawn. What did you mean by that? Claire pressed, her voice filled with unease. Frederick smirked, his smile cold. You think I married you out of love? You're charming, young, beautiful, and perfect for building my image as a stable, respectable man. The rumors about me quiet down when I have a wife like you. Claire froze. So, everything you've given me, everything you've said to me, it was all a lie. Frederick chuckled derisively. Does it matter? You're living in luxury, with everything you could ever want. Isn't that why you agreed to be my wife? Claire sprang to her feet, her eyes brimming with tears. You have no right to insult me like this. I'm not some decoration for your life. Frederick's expression hardened. Sit down, Claire. I don't like being spoken to like this in my own house. This isn't my home anymore. Claire shouted, tears streaming down her face. She ran to her room and slammed the door shut. In the cold, empty room, Claire curled up in the corner of the bed. She felt as if everything was falling apart. The love she once believed in had turned out to be nothing more than a clever trap. She felt betrayed, cruelly used. The next morning, Claire woke up with swollen eyes. She went downstairs and saw Ines clearing the table. When Ines noticed Claire, she shook her head gently, her voice heavy with sorrow. Miss Claire, you shouldn't stay here any longer. Claire looked at her, her eyes welling up with tears. But where would I go? My family has disowned me. Ines placed a comforting hand on Claire's shoulder, her gaze filled with empathy. Family is the only place that will never truly reject you. I believe they will forgive you if you're genuinely sorry. Claire bit her lip. I don't know, Ines. I'm afraid they'll never forgive me. Ines sighed. Then what will you do? Stay here forever like this? The question made Claire pause. She couldn't continue living this lie. She had to do something, no matter how difficult it might be. That afternoon, Claire decided to leave the mansion. She packed a few clothes into a small suitcase. Before stepping out of the room, she looked back at the luxurious space that now felt unbearably cold. Downstairs, Frederick was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. Seeing Claire with her suitcase, he didn't look surprised. Frederick set the paper down and spoke in an even tone. "Where are you going?" Claire held her head high. "I'm leaving. I can't stay with someone who only sees me as a tool." Frederick smirked. "And where will you go? Your family has disowned you. Your friends have abandoned you. You have no one left." Claire gripped the handle of her suitcase tightly. "I'd rather be alone than stay here and be used." Frederick crossed his arms, his gaze icy. "Go, then. But remember, this door will never open for you again." Claire said nothing more and walked straight out the door. The cold San Francisco night stung her skin, and the wind made her shiver. But inside, she felt an unexpected lightness. No matter how uncertain her future was, she had freed herself from the gilded cage. She wandered aimlessly through the deserted streets. The dim glow of streetlights stretched across the rain-slick pavement. Claire felt small and insignificant in the vast city. Suddenly, she thought of Alice. She pulled out her phone, hesitated for a moment, then sent a message. "Alice, I need to see you. I don't know where else to go." The message was sent, but no reply came. Claire clenched her phone tightly, the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. She realized that now, she truly had no one left. Standing in the cold square, Claire whispered through her tears. "What do I do now?" Claire wandered aimlessly through the cold streets of San Francisco, her arms wrapped tightly around her thin coat, as if trying to shield herself from the chill that seeped into her skin. The grand city now felt unfamiliar and colder than ever. The pale yellow streetlights stretched endlessly, reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. Claire felt invisible, lost among the hurried passers-by. The sudden ringing of her phone startled her. It was Alice. "Claire." Alice's voice came through, filled with worry. "Where are you?" Claire choked back a sob. I don't know. I've left Frederick's house." There was a brief silence on the other end before Alice sighed. "Tell me where you are. I'll come get you." Claire hesitated, glancing around the empty street. "I'm at Union Square." "Okay, stay there. I'm coming." Alice hung up. Claire let out a shaky breath, but her heart still felt heavy. She sat on a cold stone bench, her eyes turning upward to the dark sky. Rain began to fall, light drops mixing with the tears she was trying to hold back. It wasn't long before Alice arrived, her long coat billowing in the wind. She ran up to Claire, her face etched with concern. "Claire, for heaven's sake, what are you doing out here?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. Claire looked down. "I didn't know where else to go." Alice sat beside her, taking Claire's hand. "Come on, let's go to my place. You can't stay out here like this." Claire shook her head. "I don't want to be a burden." "A burden? Don't be ridiculous. You're my best friend," Alice said firmly, squeezing Claire's hand. "I'm not leaving you out here." Unable to refuse, Claire allowed Alice to help her up. Together, they left the empty square behind. Alice's apartment was small but cozy. The scent of hot tea filled the room, bringing some warmth to the chilly winter night. Alice set a cup of tea in front of Claire, her eyes filled with concern. "Claire, tell me. What happened?" Claire gripped the cup tightly, staying silent for a long moment before finally speaking in a quiet voice. "Frederick doesn't love me. I was just a tool for him to build his image." Alice's eyes widened in shock. "What? What did he do to you?" Claire shook her head. "It's not what you think. He didn't hit me or anything like that. But he controlled everything: how I dressed, how I spoke, who I could talk to. I was blind to think it was love." Alice sighed deeply. "I tried to warn you. But I never imagined it was like this." Claire smiled faintly, sadness evident in her expression. I know. I was wrong. Alice was silent for a moment before gently asking, have you thought about going back home? Claire froze, her eyes filled with unease. My father disowned me. My mother didn't defend me. I'm afraid they'll never forgive me. Alice placed a reassuring hand on Claire's shoulder, her gaze serious. Claire, family is the one place that will always forgive you. But you have to be brave enough to face them. Claire lowered her gaze, her eyes following the drops of water sliding down her teacup. She knew Alice was right, but the fear of rejection still haunted her. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned on the small sofa, her mind racing with thoughts. Images of her parents flashed vividly in her mind. Her father, Robert, with his stern face but warm eyes, and her mother, Martha, always gentle and the one who listened when Claire was upset. But now, everything had changed. Do they still think of me? Or have they forgotten me entirely? Claire wondered. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall silently. The streetlights cast shadows on the walls, elongating the darkness in the room. Claire hugged a pillow tightly, tears soaking her cheeks. She knew she couldn't keep running away forever. The next morning, Alice found Claire sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from lack of sleep. Claire, are you okay? Alice asked. Claire nodded faintly. I think I'll try going home. Alice smiled softly, relieved. That's the right decision. I'll go with you. Claire shook her head. No, this is something I have to face alone. Alice took Claire's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Whatever happens, you're not alone. If things don't go as planned, come back here to me. Claire smiled, though her expression was tinged with worry. She stood up, pulled on her thin coat, and stepped outside. San Francisco in the early morning was peaceful. Claire walked slowly down the road leading to her childhood home. Each step felt heavy. Memories of her youth flooded back every street corner, every tree evoking countless moments from the past. She stopped in front of the familiar house. The windows were closed, and the gray-painted iron gate now seemed distant and unwelcoming. Claire hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold gate. Would they open the door for me? Claire took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the silent windows. Fear bubbled up inside her, but a faint glimmer of hope still lingered in her heart. Claire stood frozen in front of the iron gate, the memories of her childhood flooding back like a slow-reeling film, afternoons baking with her mother in the kitchen, walks with her father on this very street. But now, they were just distant echoes. Her hand brushed against the gate, but she let it fall back down. She couldn't summon the courage to press the doorbell. Her father's words from that day rang loudly in her mind, a cruel verdict: if you walk out that door, don't ever come back. The cold wind blew, scattering dry leaves that rustled at her feet. Claire clenched her fists, overwhelmed by uncertainty. She couldn't press the doorbell, but she couldn't return to Alice's apartment either. Without realizing it, Claire turned and walked away, carrying her fear and turmoil with her. She didn't know where she was going, she just let her feet take her farther from the house. Claire found herself at a small cafe tucked into a quiet street corner, a place she and her mother used to visit on cool afternoons. It hadn't changed, still cozy, with soft yellow lights and the warm scent of coffee filling the air. But the comforting atmosphere no longer reached her. She sat at a table by the window and ordered a cup of tea. When the waitress brought it over, Claire realized it was Lucy, the same server who had worked there for years. "Claire. Is that you?" Lucy asked, surprised as she set the tea on the table. Claire nodded faintly, managing a small smile. "Hello, Lucy. It's been a while." Lucy studied Claire for a moment, her expression tinged with concern. "I heard about your marriage to Mr. Frederick. Everyone's been talking." Claire gave a bitter smile. "Yes. Well, I'm not living there anymore. Lucy paused, then gently asked, "Are you okay? I heard your family was furious." Claire tightened her grip on the teacup, her voice low. "They disowned me. Now I don't know what to do." Lucy sighed softly. "Family is family, Claire. They're the ones who love you most. But I understand it's not easy to go back." Claire didn't respond. Her gaze drifted out to the street, where people hurried past, all heading somewhere. Everyone seemed to have a place to belong. But Claire didn't. The evening settled in as Claire wandered through the old streets of San Francisco. Every corner, every building brought back memories, now laced with sadness. Walking past a small park, Claire noticed a little girl sitting on a swing, crying. For reasons she couldn't explain, the sight made her pause. Claire approached gently and asked, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The girl looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. I lost my mom." Claire's heart ached. She sat down beside the girl and gently patted her head. "Don't cry. I'll help you find your mom." The girl nodded softly, her tiny hand clutching Claire's tightly. Claire led the girl around the park, looking for a woman who seemed distressed. Eventually, they found a middle-aged woman frantically searching the area. "Marina! Oh my God, there you are!" The woman cried, scooping the little girl into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Claire smiled in relief. "She was lost, so I helped her look for you." The woman held Claire's hand tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much. I'm Carmen. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Claire shook her head. "It's nothing. I'm just glad she's safe." Carmen studied Claire for a moment before asking, "Are you okay? You don't look well." Claire hesitated, then offered a faint, sad smile. "I'm just a little tired." Carmen placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I own a small restaurant nearby. Stop by any time." Claire nodded, expressing her gratitude before walking away. Though the encounter was brief, Carmen's kindness warmed Claire's heart, if only a little. Night had fallen by the time Claire found herself back on the street leading to her family's home. The darkness and silence deepened her fear. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Claire turned and saw a strange man following her. "Excuse me, where are you going?" he asked in a gruff voice. Panic surged through Claire, and she quickened her pace. The man matched her speed. "I can't let him catch me," Claire thought, turning abruptly into a narrow alley. Fortunately, the dim glow of a small shop's lights appeared ahead. Claire hurried inside, escaping the unnerving presence. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man with a kind face, looked at Claire with concern. "Are you okay?" Claire, still catching her breath, nodded weakly. "Someone was following me." The man frowned and glanced outside. "Don't worry. You're safe here." Claire nodded, her heart still racing. In that moment, she realized San Francisco no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. She couldn't keep wandering aimlessly. Sooner or later, she would have to face her family. After ensuring the strange man had left, Claire exited the shop and continued walking through the cold streets of San Francisco. The city's familiar charm was now shrouded in darkness and alienation. She walked slowly, her mind blank. "I can't go on like this," Claire whispered to herself. No matter where she went, she felt lost. Her family was the only place she could return to, but the fear of rejection loomed heavy in her heart. Claire stopped in a small park, where she and her mother used to spend time during her childhood. She sat on a cold stone bench, her thoughts drifting to the past. "Claire, slow down, or you'll fall." Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. She remembered the afternoons when her mother brought her here to play and her father sat under a tree reading the newspaper, occasionally glancing up with a warm smile. But those days were long gone. Do I still have a chance to fix everything? Claire wondered. She clenched her fists, determination flickering in her eyes. Even though her father had disowned her and her mother had turned away, she couldn't keep running. She had to face reality. Claire stood before her family's home for the second time. Light from inside spilled faintly through the windows, offering a sliver of hope. She gripped the strap of her bag tightly, her hand trembling as it hovered over the cold iron gate. She raised her hand, but fear gripped her, and she let it fall. She was terrified of hearing her father's cold words, of seeing the disappointment in her mother's eyes. At that moment, a voice called from behind her. Claire. Startled, Claire turned to see Lucas, her cousin. He was older now, his face filled with surprise at the sight of her. Lucas, Claire whispered. Lucas looked at her, his expression a mix of surprise and hesitation. What are you doing here? Claire lowered her gaze, her voice soft. I wanted to see my parents. Lucas was silent for a moment before he sighed. They're having dinner. Do you want me to tell them you're here? Claire hesitated. No. I'm not ready. Can you help me? Lucas studied her for a long moment before nodding. I'll tell Aunt Martha you're outside. Claire offered a grateful smile. Lucas turned and disappeared into the house, leaving Claire standing alone in the dark. She watched him go, anxiety churning in her chest. What would Lucas say to her mother? How would her father react? But at least, she thought, she had done something instead of hiding. Inside, Martha was clearing the dinner table when Lucas entered, his voice hesitant. Aunt Martha, someone wants to see you. Martha looked up, frowning slightly. Who is it? Lucas hesitated before answering, It's Claire. Martha froze, the plate in her hand nearly slipping to the floor. Claire, she repeated, her voice trembling. Lucas nodded. She's outside at the gate. Martha stood still, her eyes clouded with a mix of emotions. She didn't know whether to feel joy or anger. The daughter she had once loved most, the one who had caused her so much pain, was now standing outside. Robert, sitting at the table, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He quietly folded his newspaper, his gaze distant. Martha looked at him, speaking softly. Robert, Claire has come back. Robert didn't respond. He simply set the paper aside, his expression unreadable. Outside, Claire remained at the gate, her eyes fixed on the faint light inside the house. She had no idea what was happening within. Suddenly, the front door opened. Martha appeared on the doorstep, her gaze uncertain as she looked toward the gate. Claire's heart raced when she saw her mother. But Martha didn't move closer. She simply stood there in silence. Claire wanted to call out, to yell for her mother, but her throat tightened, and no sound came out. All she could do was stand and wait. Lucas stepped outside and whispered to Martha, Aunt, aren't you going to talk to her? Martha sighed deeply. I don't know what to say, Lucas. Lucas looked at her, then at Claire, his expression conflicted. Time seemed to stand still. Claire stood there, her heart heavy. Martha lingered on the doorstep, hesitant. Robert remained silent inside, unmoving. Claire understood. Her parents weren't ready to forgive her. Perhaps they never would be. Tears rolled down Claire's cheeks as she turned away, each step away from the familiar gate feeling like a weight on her soul. She didn't blame them. She was the one who had hurt them. But deep inside, Claire still held on to a fragile hope that one day, that door would open again to welcome her back. Darkness enveloped Claire as she walked quietly through the endless streets of San Francisco. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Maybe I should leave this place, she thought to herself. But then, the memory of her mother's gaze on the doorstep resurfaced in her mind, not entirely angry, but tinged with hesitation, something unspoken. Claire stopped and tilted her head to look at the night sky. Amid the countless twinkling stars, she found a faint glimmer of hope. Though she knew the road home would be arduous, Claire realized she couldn't give up. Claire stood motionless in front of her family's gate, her hands trembling as they clutched the straps of her bag. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the familiar windows. The warm light spilling from the living room filled her with a whirlwind of emotions. I can't turn away anymore. This is my home. Claire raised her hand, hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the still night. Time seemed to freeze. Claire's heart pounded wildly, her legs felt weak. She feared her mother wouldn't open the door, or that her father would coldly turn her away. The door slowly creaked open. Martha appeared, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of Claire. For a moment, the two women stood in silence, neither able to find the words. Martha clutched the hem of her cardigan tightly, her gaze conflicted. "Mom," Claire said softly, her voice breaking. Martha remained still, not taking a single step forward. The silence stretched on, suffocating Claire. Claire lowered her head as tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know I hurt you, hurt the whole family. But I have nowhere else to go. I just want to come home." Martha's eyes softened, though she still didn't respond. She looked at the frail, weary figure of the daughter who had once been her pride and joy. "Claire," Martha's voice wavered. "You've gone too far." Claire sobbed. "I know. I regret it. I truly regret it." Looking into her daughter's tear-filled eyes, Martha felt a wave of compassion. How could she harbor hatred for the child she had born and raised? Without another word, Martha quietly opened the door wider. Claire lifted her gaze, hope shining in her tear-streaked face. Without hesitation, she stepped inside, warmth flooding her heart. "Come in, it's cold out," Martha said gently, her tone softer now. Claire entered the familiar home, the place that had once been her sanctuary. The scent of old wood and the faint aroma of food from the kitchen made her want to cry all over again. In the living room, Robert sat reading the newspaper. Hearing the commotion, he looked up. His eyes met Claire's. The atmosphere froze. Robert didn't speak, he simply stared at his daughter. His expression was unreadable, cold, yet tinged with something deeper. Claire trembled as she approached him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad. I'm sorry." Robert didn't reply. He set the newspaper down on the table, his hands clasped together. "Why are you only coming back now?" His voice was hoarse, devoid of anger but also lacking warmth. Claire lowered her head. I was wrong. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid you and Mom wouldn't forgive me." Robert remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he stood and walked slowly to Claire. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze stern, but underneath was a well of pain. "Do you think we didn't worry about you?" His voice cracked. "You embarrassed us, but we never stopped worrying." Claire broke into sobs. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Martha stepped closer, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. "Robert, she's home now. We can't turn our backs on her." Robert closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. Then he nodded slightly. "Fine. You can stay." Those words were like a door opening in Claire's heart. She burst into tears and embraced her father. Robert gently patted her back, saying nothing more. Martha wiped away her own tears and spoke softly. "Come to the kitchen. I'll heat up some soup for you." Claire nodded and followed her mother into the kitchen. The small, cozy room was just as she remembered it. Martha ladled hot soup into a bowl and set it in front of her. "Eat." You've lost so much weight. Claire picked up the spoon, each sip of soup warming her heart. Thank you, Mom. Martha sat beside her, her gaze tender. What do you plan to do now? Claire paused thoughtfully. I don't want anything to do with Frederick anymore. I want to start over. Martha placed a hand on her daughter's. We'll always be here for you. But you have to be strong. Claire nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I won't let myself fall again. From the doorway, Robert spoke quietly. If you need help, just ask. Claire looked up at him, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Her family had forgiven her. And now, she had a chance to begin anew. In the days following her return, Claire began to feel the warmth of her family again. Martha, though still a bit reserved, showed her care through every meal and the blankets she placed over Claire at night. Robert was quieter, but Claire noticed the coldness in his eyes had faded. One morning, as Claire sat by the window, Martha approached her gently. Claire, what's your next step? She asked, her tone both soft and worried. Claire looked at her mother, her gaze firm. I don't want to rely on anyone anymore. I want to rebuild my life. Martha nodded, relief in her eyes. That's the right choice. But take your time. Claire smiled. I've wasted too much time already. Martha sighed lightly. So, what will you do? Claire thought for a moment. I want to open a small cafe. A place where people can find peace. I don't have much money, but I believe I can make it work. Martha was surprised. A cafe? Claire nodded. I used to love making coffee. I want to create something of my own. Robert, overhearing the conversation, entered the room. He looked at Claire thoughtfully. Have you made up your mind? Claire turned to him, her eyes resolute. Yes. I want to start from nothing. Robert was silent for a long time before nodding. I won't interfere, but if you need advice, I'll help. Claire was moved. Thank you, Dad. A few days later, Claire began searching for a suitable location. Alice, her best friend, was always by her side, helping her. Claire, this spot looks perfect. Alice said, pointing to a small building on a quiet street. Claire peered inside. The space was modest but cozy. She envisioned a cafe with wooden tables, soft yellow lighting, and the warm aroma of coffee filling the air. This is exactly what I've been looking for, Claire said, smiling. Alice patted her shoulder. I know you can do it. Feeling a surge of motivation, Claire decided to rent the space and began renovations. Over the following days, she and Alice cleaned and painted every corner. Martha occasionally visited, bringing pastries or meals. Though she didn't say much, her pride was evident in her eyes. Robert also helped quietly. One afternoon, he brought over some old wooden tables and chairs he had stored away. I thought these might suit your space, Robert said, his voice gruff but caring. Claire was touched. Thank you, Dad. On the cafe's opening day, Claire stood nervously behind the counter. A small sign hung outside reading La Esperanza, Hope, symbolizing her new beginning. Alice was the first customer, cheerfully ordering a cup of coffee. Claire, I'm so proud of you. Claire smiled warmly. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. Gradually, customers trickled in. The cozy atmosphere and Claire's heartfelt service drew people in. She poured her love into every cup of coffee and every small pastry she served. Customers could feel the sincerity and warmth radiating from the young cafe owner. Martha sometimes helped around the cafe, and Robert often sat in the corner, reading the newspaper while quietly watching his daughter with pride. One afternoon, while Claire was wiping down the counter, Alice walked in with a serious expression. Claire, have you heard the news? Alice asked in a low voice. Claire looked up. What is it? Frederick. He's under investigation for financial fraud. It's all over the news. Claire froze. Really? Alice nodded. They say he scammed many investors. His assets are being seized. Claire remained silent for a moment before letting out a sigh. The truth has finally come out. Alice looked at her with concern. Are you okay? Claire smiled faintly. Yes. I have nothing to do with him anymore. All I care about now is this cafe. Alice sighed in relief. I'm glad you're so strong. That afternoon, Claire stood outside her cafe, watching the flow of people passing by. The soft sunlight reflected off the sign La Esperanza. Martha joined her, gently asking, "Are you all right?" Claire smiled, her eyes filled with newfound confidence. I'm all right, Mom. Truly all right. In the days following the news of Frederick's scandal spreading across the newspapers, Claire felt a significant shift in her life. Her café, La Esperanza, grew increasingly popular not just for its delicious coffee but also for the story of a young woman's resilience and determination to rebuild her life after hardship. One morning, as Claire was cleaning the counter, Alice burst in, holding a newspaper, her face filled with excitement. "Claire, you need to see this," Alice said, placing the paper on the counter. The front page headline read, "Businessman Frederick Morales arrested for financial fraud and money laundering." Claire stared at the image of Frederick in handcuffs, his once confident, arrogant demeanor replaced by weariness and defeat. Alice spoke softly. "He's been convicted. The investors he defrauded came forward to testify against him. All his assets have been seized." Claire closed her eyes and took a deep breath. So, the day has finally come. Alice sat down, her gaze filled with concern. "Do you feel relieved?" Claire nodded slightly. "I don't care anymore. He's paying the price for what he did. All I want now is a peaceful life." Just then, the cafe door opened. A middle-aged man in a neat suit walked in, his face shadowed with sadness. Claire immediately recognized him as Frederick's lawyer, Ernest. He approached the counter, looking at Claire with a hesitant expression. "Hello, Miss Claire. I'm Ernest, Frederick's attorney." Claire regarded him calmly. "What do you want?" Ernest sighed. "I'm here to inform you that Frederick asked me to deliver a message before he was arrested. He left you a letter." Claire frowned slightly. "An apology? What good does that do now?" Ernest placed a small envelope on the counter. "Regardless, I've fulfilled my duty. Whether you read it or not is up to you." Claire picked up the envelope silently. Ernest nodded politely before leaving the cafe. Alice watched Claire, her eyes curious. "What are you going to do?" Claire remained silent for a moment, then slowly opened the envelope. Frederick's handwriting appeared on the page. "Claire. If you're reading this letter, it means I no longer have the chance to make amends. I know what I've done is unforgivable. I'm sorry for using you, for making you a part of my selfish schemes. I don't expect your forgiveness, I only hope you find the happiness you deserve. Frederick." After reading, Claire closed her eyes briefly, then carefully folded the letter and placed it on the table. "I don't care anymore. That's the past." Alice smiled. "Exactly. You've already moved on." Claire stood up and looked around her bustling cafe. Customers were chatting happily, the sound of the coffee machine humming steadily in the background. Everything felt peaceful. Months later, La Esperanza became a beloved spot for locals. Claire poured her heart into the cafe, nurturing it with love and dedication. She even added a small book corner and began hosting events where people could share life stories and experiences. One day, to Claire's surprise, Robert and Martha walked into the cafe. Robert looked sharp in a suit, his expression brighter than Claire had ever seen. "You're quite the busy one, aren't you?" Robert said with a soft chuckle. Claire was taken aback. Are you both here to visit me? Martha smiled warmly. We heard your cafe is thriving, so we came to see how our daughter is doing. Claire beamed with joy and led them to a table. Sit here. I'll make you some coffee. A little while later, Claire brought over 2 steaming cups of coffee. I made these myself. Robert took a sip and nodded approvingly. Not bad at all. Martha glanced around the cafe, her eyes glowing with pride. I'm so proud of you. Claire's heart swelled. Thank you for giving me a chance to start over. Robert looked at her, his voice steady and warm. You've grown so much. We're very proud of you. Claire smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had found her way back to her family and, more importantly, to herself. One afternoon, Claire stood at the cafe's entrance, watching the golden rays of the setting sun. Alice approached her, holding a small bouquet of flowers. For the cafe a little more color. Alice said cheerfully. Claire accepted the flowers with a soft smile. Thank you, Alice. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. Alice patted her shoulder. We're friends. We'll always be there for each other. Claire gazed at the sign La Esperanza, glowing under the sunlight. She knew that from this moment on, her life would be filled with peace and hope. At last, Claire had truly left the past behind and found her own happiness. Claire's journey is a poignant reminder of the value of family, courage, and independence. Mistakes may lead us astray, but family remains the one place willing to forgive and welcome us back. Moreover, her perseverance and willingness to face the consequences of her choices enabled Claire to rise above her past and rebuild her life. Most importantly, Claire learned to value herself, refuse to be used, and stand strong after every stumble to reclaim true happiness.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.